I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
It was the experience of a lifetime, which a lot of people always say that. And I would say that in my case, I think once in a lifetime, even though it was fabulous and amazing and lived up to all of my expectations, but once was enough.
That is today's guest, Philip D. Gibbons, a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and creator of the history biography podcast titled Some Very Famous People You've Never Really Heard of. When we recorded this interview, Philip had just returned from 5 days and 4 nights hiking the world-famous Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, which, of course, is one of the most popular adventure travel experiences in the world. If it's something you want to do, you generally have to book it months in advance. So use this episode today to lock in your trip for the coming year if that's something you wanted to do. And hopefully this will save you months of research and potentially thousands of dollars in mistakes. I chose Philip for this interview not only because he was fresh back from the trip, but also I thought he could offer some great advice around the physical part of the experience. He is 68 years old. He was very upfront about that in the email, and that was one of the things he wanted to discuss, how it was a bit tougher physically for him. So if you're younger, perhaps hearing about his experience will act as a call to action to plan a trip that's very physical in nature like this sooner rather than later. And if you're older, you're going to hear what the experience was like for Philip and what is possible for you. Along with all that, you're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at one of the craziest parts of Philip's story, his experience winning $500,000 on a famous game show.
And I said, the only way I can get out of this hole that I'm in, and I don't even mean mental, or I said, literally, I'm going to wind up probably out on the street one of these days with this. It wasn't getting along with management too well. And so I said, I got to go on the show and I got to win $1 million. I have to do that. There's no other way out.
You'll hear what happened to the money, of course, all of the practical advice around doing the Inca Trail adventure, some incredible travel stories mixed with some life lessons, and loads more coming at you right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This, of course, is the show to help you travel the world on your terms. That's right, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. I'm actually fresh off a trip myself. Just took a wonderful and extremely hot, believe it or not, trip around Norway, a road trip. I'll be recording an episode about that later today, so stay tuned on the pod if you want to hear some advice around traveling in Norway and some of the lessons I learned on this recent trip. And speaking of that, if you want to stay up to date on all of the fun stuff happening here on the pod and off the pod, check out zerototravel.com/newsletter. Sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Philip D. Gibbons, our guest today. His website is bitesizedbiographies.com. We'll link up to it in the show notes. Stick around on the back end of this conversation. I want to share something you should never take for granted. And this is just a reminder, something that you can use to allow you to guide you and motivate you in your upcoming travel and life choices. Also want to leave you with a quote about the one home we all share, even the nomads out there, And no, it's not planet Earth. So stick around for all that. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Philip. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Philip Gibbons, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? And I'm after heading off on the Inca Trail, as we're about to discuss. I'm alive, so that is something that's very positive.
Alive is a good first step after a trip, I would say. No, I appreciate that you reached out, and I just kind of wanted to start this conversation with that because I always encourage people that are listening to the show or just, in the community and other travelers, everybody has a wealth of knowledge that can help others. So if I can be in the position to provide a platform for somebody to come in and give advice for others that might want to do something travel related or lifestyle related, whatever, that's what we're here for. So I just wanted to start to the listeners right now, a little call to action. If you think you can provide value to this community, like Philip's going to do today, talking about his experience, like doing some crazy research for the Inca Trail and Machu Picchu, and then actually doing it, then get in touch because we can have you on and we can share your knowledge. So anyway, sorry. With all that said, Philip, welcome.
It's my pleasure.
So you are fresh back. I mean, that's one of the main topics we're going to talk about today is sort of I would call it like Machu Picchu or Inca Trail 101, because it seems like you did a lot of, as you said in the email you sent, quote, my extensive research could not adequately detail both the challenges and realities of this unique undertaking. And so I want to hear about sort of the best practices. I know there are listeners out there that want to do the Inca Trail, and that's a big bucket list thing. I did it, 20 plus years ago. So I know a lot's changed. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to, get the fresh take on how to prep and everything. So how was the trip though? Let's start there.
It was the experience of a lifetime, which a lot of people always say that. And I would say that in my case, I think once in a lifetime, even though it was fabulous and amazing and lived up to all of my expectations, but once was enough. It was incredibly arduous. It was a lot more than I kind of expected it in a certain way, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. But I think many people will be almost shocked by how difficult and arduous this was, the way this particular, my tour was set up and some of the things that you experience. Both good, some are great and some bad, to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we're not usually bringing up age on this show, but I know you mentioned in your email you're 68 and you thought you could talk about the hike in terms of how it might be for older listeners. So obviously this can vary depending on your age, fitness level, things like that. What were your expectations going in? Because that's always a tricky thing as a traveler, especially when you go and do one of these sort of big sites like that you've heard about and you've dreamed about and you've seen all the pictures and it's something you've wanted to do for a long time. The expectations can be pretty high sometimes, even though you might not want to put yourself in that situation to be disappointed. But yeah, what kind of were your expectations? Like, how did you manage that going in?
And this has been 20 years in the making, because somebody that I knew quite well went to Machu Picchu years ago. And so it's always been on my list of things to do. But I live in Southern California, so that's a long way to go to Peru. It's not around the corner. It's the logistics. Actually, not to get too personal, but my mother passed away a couple of years ago. She was 90 years old, but she had stopped traveling really when she was 80. And I realized, I'm 68. So there's some of these trips like this one. If I'm going to do it and do the Inca Trail, I'm running out of time. When I'm 75, I don't think I can do this. And there was somebody actually on the trip who was 73 years old, actually a female, who when I saw her to begin with, I said, I can't believe they're going to let this person out onto the Inca Trail. But she was a real trooper, and so it's possible. But again, to get back to your question, I mean, the one way that people do Machu Picchu, as I think is, they come to Cusco, they acclimatize, they get on a train, they might do the 1 or 2 day hike, but a lot of people get on a train, they go out to Machu Picchu, and they're there for maybe 2 to 3 hours. They might climb Huayna Picchu. Some people stay overnight and go there twice, but a lot of people go out there, they're only out there for 3 hours. And that's their whole experience with Machu Picchu, and so then they come back on the train, and it is interesting. But for me, I just wanted something more than that, when I started to read about the Inca Trail years ago, and I was like, this is how I want to do this. And by the way, I have input on that in my research, and I was fortunate, and in the type of tour I decided to take, which was the 5-day, 4-night tour. But, because the traditional way to do this is to hike for 4 days, 3 nights. And for me, there were a couple reasons that I thought that was one of the things. Is on the last day, when you go to Machu Picchu, they wake you up in the middle of the night and you have to line up to get into the national park, and they don't let you in until 5:30. And if the weather is bad or whatever, you just have to stand in the line for 60 to 90 minutes before they'll even let you in. And so for me, that just sounded terrible, as opposed to the way I did it, where when you get there on the 5th day, basically, on the 4th day, basically, you don't get there till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And by then the place is almost half empty. The trail is empty. We were the only people really on the trail, because most people don't do it. They do 4-day, 3-night. So that for me was a major reason to do 5-day, 4-night. That was one reason. The other reason is 4-day, 3-night. They really hustle you along the trail. They hustle you along the trail anyway, and that's a whole long probably discussion we need to have. But if you're 68, if you're not 28 and you're not an experienced trekker, and you're going to go 40% longer each day on a 4-day, 3-night. And I can tell you, especially on the second day, if you can remember, the second day to Dead Woman's Pass is just a killer for anybody. I mean, even if you're people who've climbed, I was on a trek with people who had trekked in Nepal in crampons and snow. And after day 2, they were even saying, this is one of the worst, most challenging days I've ever experienced, in sort of my trekking career. So that again, if you're looking at this, I would take a close look at that. The other very general observation I make that I think is helpful: May to September is the dry season in Peru. Now it is wintertime, which means the days are shorter, but the weather in Peru doesn't really change all that much. It's 70, the highs are in the 70s, and the lows in the wintertime get to be under maybe 40 degrees, especially in the mountains. But again, if you go in say November, it's the rainy season. And the other thing about that they don't really tell you is that this is not only arduous, this can be really dangerous. I mean, again, if you recall, like some of these, some of the parts of the trail are kind of beaten up. There's these stone steps. It's not dirt, it's not sand. You are going down a foot at a time. These rocky steps, you're using poles, which again, anyone who doesn't use poles on this, my joke I would say to is, well, if you know how to fly, yeah, that's fine. But otherwise, I suggest using poles because, especially going downhill. Uphill is one thing, but going downhill, you easily, if you fall, you're going to fall face first. And some of these steps are a series of 15 to 20 steps at a time. There's nothing to break your fall. You're just going to fall face forward at a 70-degree angle. And so I did it in the dry season, there was not a single drop of rain the whole time I was in Peru. In Cusco, when I got to Machu Picchu, it was blue sky the whole time. There was fog at night, but that's kind of more atmospheric. And so during the day, we had total blue sky. And I can't tell you how much of a difference, I'm sure, from a safety perspective, from May to September, that's when I'm suggesting people go. And some people they say, well, I'll just go in November because I have time then. And, it's rainy, but so what? I'll dress for it. But I don't think they grasp how much different that's going to make this trip and this trek. It will definitely make a big, big difference. And imagine getting to Machu Picchu and you've waited your whole life to get there and it's socked in with fog. and you can barely, you don't have much even visibility. And that happens in the rainy season as well, So again, when I got there, it was blue sky, which nobody, I was shocked because everything I've read, it usually says, well, there's always fog in the morning. Don't worry. It'll burn off. Not even fog, absolute crystal clear blue sunshine, both of the days that I was there.
Okay. So to recap, you're saying basically after living the experience, doing all the research of all the trips you can take, you're recommending a 4-night, 5-day excursion. May through September would be the ideal time to go and bring trekking poles.
Yes.
Well, I think it's important because if you're somebody listening and you're like, I do want to do this. This is something I want to do. This is the starting point for planning it. And as you mentioned, there are the other options for amounts of days and stuff like that. But it sounds to me like, at least for you, in your opinion, it was that it's better to take more time, essentially.
Yeah, I think, yes, you can do the one, I think it's 1 night, 2 day. I think that that's a completely sort of different experience. But of the two main choices you have, definitely the 5-day. And, we could talk about this too, but they definitely still push you and they have their agenda. And I think it's important for people to have your own agenda because any of these trekking companies, they're very time oriented. They're very focused on getting you to a certain place at a certain time. And you have to be aware of that. And you just have to try to go as much as you can at your own pace. But there will be times when they will really be hustling people along, no matter what your ability is, no matter what, because there are things that will slow you down or slow the group down. And so they want to be almost an hour early as opposed to being certainly an hour late. And so they're always conscious of how quickly they're moving. And that is basically the guide. And we had one guide, we had a whole group of porters, but essentially it was one guide that we interacted with because I only had 7 people on my particular group, which I think is a little unusual, but that also might have to do with the 5-day, 4-night situation.
Okay. So this is why I was excited to have you on too, because you just did this. And when I did it, the thing that I did, and I think that I would have recommended then, I don't think it's the case anymore, is we showed up in Cusco and then we found a local company there. And it was a lot cheaper and still quality, than if we bought it before we arrived to Peru. That can be just a general travel hack for people around the world, right? Like if you're buying a packaged thing before you go, there's a good chance that you could get it the same sort of experience for a much less lower cost on the ground. But then you're taking the chance of not having it set up in the beginning and all that sort of stuff. That being said, I know there's some permitting things now. I know there's some restrictions on how many people can come. I'm not even sure if people are allowed to do it on their own anymore, if you have to go with a company. So you kind of give us the 101 on all of that.
That's really short and sweet. First of all, you're not allowed on the trail anymore without a guide. Second of all, the maximum number of permits they allow on the Inca Trail for each specific day is 200 trekkers or hikers and 300 workers or total guides and cooks and porters and all that kind of stuff. So as a result, and I think you may have, based on your time frame, this may have been going on there, but the whole Inca Trail was getting trashed. I think they also did a lot with Machu Picchu in this regard, but it's much more regulated. And the other thing now is you can't just show up in Cusco and even go to a company and say, I'd like to pay 50% less, because usually these things all sell out with only 200 people a day, and this being a worldwide attraction. And I think it's only getting more and more popular. People suggested to me, and I did this. I made my reservations about 6 months in advance just to make sure that I got there. I got to go. And even the first day I requested, they said it's not available 6 months in advance.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So that's a big change. Yeah. Because it can maybe be different in the off season. I'm not going to speak to that, but yeah. So the big tip here is that you need to plan this well in advance, which isn't, everybody's cup of tea, but for some things, I always encourage people that are listening that are more like of the spontaneous type of travelers. You have to accept that some things might need to be planned far in advance because you won't be able to do them if it's something you really want to do. You can go to the Eiffel Tower on the whim, but you can't necessarily go to Machu Picchu where they're only allowing 200 to 300 people in a day, and those are being booked, in your experience, 6 months out, or at least. So yeah, just some food for thought for people listening.
Well, and the other thing is, when you think about it, there's a few things here that you gotta figure out. First of all, they have to figure out how they're going to get you to the trailhead. Then when you get to the trailhead, there's admission tickets. There's admission tickets to Machu Picchu. If you want to climb Huayna Picchu, that's even more restricted. I think they only let like 75 people up in each. There's only 2-hour-long segments that they'll admit you. And so that's greatly restricted, and those sell out. That was one of the reasons I couldn't get the first day I requested. By the way, we can talk about Huayna Picchu and all that, and I'm not sure if you did climb Huayna Picchu, but that's a whole separate, discussion we probably have to have. So
yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, and so the point being that then there's even the bus tickets that when you get out of Machu Picchu, they have to be a specific time, or a specific day, not a specific time, but they and that you have to pay for that. Like 20 years ago, I'm not sure how much of this you could just walk up to the bus station and buy your ticket and get on the bus. Now it's literally, if you don't get to the bus queue at like 6 a.m, if you get there by 7:30, the bus queue is like a quarter of a mile to a half a mile long, just to get on the bus to go up to Machu Picchu.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Now, back to the show. Give us sort of the background on the research you did so people have some context for what you discovered. Obviously, people will have to do their own, but did you go with an American company, a local company? How did you sort of figure it out?
The one thing right away I think you pick up on, anybody who's in the United States selling you is basically, they're just kind of private labeling a tour group that's on the ground in Peru. So clearly you're gonna pay extra for no particular reason. Now I don't know if we want to get into specific names. I went with one of, if not the most high profile company, one of the most high profile companies. And again, before we get into specific names, there were great things about them. There were a lot of things that I liked. I can't say it wasn't 100% though. There were some things that I would with this particular company that I wish they had. Let's put it this way: I wish they hadn't done certain things in a certain way. But I don't think they're unique. I think any company that you pick, and by the way, you're looking at you could go really inexpensively to like $600-700, and that'll be the 4-day, 3-night. That's why some people might choose to do that. But in my case, I paid a base of $1,200, and I did add-ons where I took a very expensive train and I stayed in a very nice hotel room in Aguas Calientes, which I did not regret either one of them for certain reasons. Again, because by the time I was done, I was exhausted. And so for me, it was worth the money, even the train ride, because it took you closer to Cusco. And all it was a 15-minute cab ride as opposed to a train and bus ride that from what I understand was, again, also was a long way back. It was probably an 8-hour excursion as opposed to I got on a train 4.5 hours later, I was in Cusco. So
okay. So what was your total cost then with the add-ons? About $1,500?
I'd say actually I took the Hiram Bingham train, and that's a $500 upgrade. So you're saying $500. I mean, but we could talk about that too. in a once in a lifetime at my age, I figured I'm never going to do this again. So I did do that. And so my total came all in. It came to about $1,800. But you could do it a lot cheaper. You can stay in their hotel room for no add-on at all. Or, you can also take the Vista Dome, which is there. You pay only $75 extra. Now you can also take local Peruvian rail, but that I don't necessarily recommend, because that you can, there were stories about them having delays of maybe even overnight where your train wouldn't even leave.
So would you say that the package you bought was not luxury, but maybe like mid-range to a little bit higher end with the add-ons, I guess? But obviously you're going to pay more if you have more nights, like you did 4-day, 5-night.
Right.
It's going to cost more than less days. But
yeah, but your base price for that is about $1,200. And then if you really don't do much of an add-on other than the Vista Dome, which is $75, so then you're looking at approximately $1,300. Now, one thing I don't want to forget is I had no idea that I was worried the whole time. Or they're talking about 2 people in a tent. And I'm thinking, like, forget what I think of the person who's going to be in my tent. I know what the person who's going to be dealing with me in my tent isn't going to be a very happy camper. I mean, just to begin with, I'm 6'3", 220 pounds. And I'm going to be flailing around in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? It's just this is not a pretty picture. And so I went to pay, because that's the other thing. You put a down payment down. You pay when you get to Cusco in cash. And you pay in American dollars, if you could believe that, or they will accept some card payment, but they'll charge you an additional 5%. So I brought cash with me. But the bottom line was, in that conversation, they did ask me, would you like your own tent, or would you like to, are you going to share a tent? And I said, well, is it extra for your own tent? And they said, yeah, it's $30. And, that's like the best $30 I've ever paid in my life. Because I cannot imagine doing this with a total stranger in your tent with you. It wouldn't work for me. And again, I don't think it would work very well for them either. So don't forget. I mean, I would even ask about that if you're doing this as a solo traveler, which I did. Now, many people on the trek did, it was husband and wife, or it was, couples or whatever, but there were some other solo travelers there too. And they all got their own, they basically did that in advance. So very worthwhile.
Yeah. It's always fun as a traveler carrying a bunch of cash like that through a new country,
Well,
kidding.
Yeah.
It's always stressful. It's like, I'm going to hide like my cash in about 10 different spots and then hope I can find it again.
Well, the other thing about that is they also said they would only take American dollars, which I thought that's like also a little, it's like, what's that about? But it's like, hey, whatever. Maybe that's why it's cheaper. Maybe it's offshore, who the heck knows, as long as, I know there's a company there who took my money. And I know they're fairly reputable. So away we go.
How big was the group, by the way? Typical group size?
So it can be as many as 15 people. But in our case, again, I think because it was 5-day, 4-night, it was only 7 people. And that's nice. Yeah, it was nice. We had, normally you get 2 guides, or maybe like a guide and an assistant, but we basically had a guide, and I think they assigned 2 porters for each person. So we started with like 14, and then a couple of them peeled off. I don't know what that was about. I think they only need them up to a certain point. And I think we pretty much wound up with 12 porters. And then there's also a chef and like an assistant chef. So that's the group.
All right. So let's talk about some of the sort of extracurricular, we can call them, things around, because you have obviously the highlight, going on the trail, having the hike through the Andes, getting to Machu Picchu, absolutely spectacular. But then you mentioned Huayna Picchu, you mentioned Aguas Calientes afterwards. You mentioned, I don't know what the Vista Dome is. You said that a couple times.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So it sounds almost like the Astrodome or something. The Vista Dome there's 3 trains you could take. You could take just regular Peru rail, which again is like kind of commuter rail for the locals and stuff. Probably not recommended, only because the scheduling is not consistent. The Vista Dome is basically, they just put a glass top on a train, and you're going through, you take the train from Alente Tambo. Hopefully I got that pronounced correctly. And you can take it to Machu Picchu. Of course, if you're hiking in, you're going to take it out of Machu Picchu back to Alente Tambo. And it's just a scenic kind of, sort of better than just being in a regular railroad train. Then the third option, which I took, was the Hiram Bingham train, which is like, luxury, open bar, gourmet meal, 4.5 hours. They take you again to the outskirts of Cusco. So that it's a quick cab ride, which my company took me directly to my hotel. And, again, if you're 22 years old, on a budget, on a shoestring, trying to spend a lot of time, on not so much money, obviously not for you. But if it's a once in a lifetime, even if you charge it and pay it off or whatever, I found it to be really entertaining. I had a great conversation on the way home with people, incredibly relaxing, like the perfect end to the whole experience.
Okay. And then you want to talk about the side sort of mountain climb you did and the Aguas Calientes stay. Those sound like options people might want to plan ahead of time. So
correct. Because what happens is, again, on the 5-day, the 4-night, you get there on the 4th day and you get there in the afternoon. So then you take some great pictures of Machu Picchu, but they don't admit you really into the area of the tour. You come in sort of through the Sun Gate, which is the back way, and then you walk sort of around the periphery of Machu Picchu, and then you take pictures from a distance, and then buses take you into Aguas Calientes. So that then you go into Aguas Calientes, and then again, you can either stay in their hotel, which doesn't cost you anything extra, which is a perfectly fine tourist hotel, or you can upgrade. And I not only upgraded, but I basically upgraded. And when my hotel, which was more expensive, it threw in, like a gourmet meal. It threw in, welcome cocktails. I also didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to go eat with the group, which some people didn't do either because they were so exhausted. I just got to stay in my hotel room. And then the next day I was going to get up and meet the group again at 6 o'clock in the morning, which I was so exhausted when I got to Machu Picchu the first day that I was almost thinking, I don't know if I can even do this tomorrow. But after a good night's sleep in a really nice hotel, I was all fired up to go again. And so for me, it was totally worth it. But again, that was another $250. So, everything's relative, especially in that situation. Their option of zero extra, that hotel was perfectly reasonable. But my hotel threw in some add-ins, not only the free meal that was good, I didn't have to leave and go anywhere, but it also took my luggage and brought it to the railroad station, unlike the other hotels where you had to kind of jackass your own luggage around Aguas Calientes for a while. So that was something that was worth it to me.
I remember the last meal I had, I believe, there before I came back. So it was a while ago. I think we had pizza, and Philip, I just had to put that little cream sauce on that pizza.
Uh-oh.
And then, I had the worst food poisoning for 24 hours back in Cusco. It was like debilitating, man. That was fun. Any traveler worth their salt is going to get food poisoning at some point and be holed up somewhere. And that was one of my worst food poisoning experiences ever, man. It was awful. Don't eat the cream sauce sitting out on the table if you happen to run across any.
Well, here's, a couple things. Again, these are just general comments along that same line. Like for instance, I did not drink any pisco sours when I was in Cusco. I didn't brush my teeth with the tap water. That, by the way, everybody says don't use the tap water even to brush your teeth. I was careful even in the shower, even in my hotel in Cusco. And when I was basically eating, they serve great food on the Inca Trail. At least my company, they knocked themselves out to do that. But I wasn't big on eating a lot of food because especially at lunchtime, they put out this huge spread. Well, then you have to get back on the trail. A lot of times, and it's 70 degrees out. Sometimes you're in the middle of hot sun and stuff and you're sweating and the idea that you're going to just, gorge out at these huge lunches and dinners they provide. I just didn't do it. And other things like they serve like ceviche and mango marinated, like raw ceviche. Well, I'm not getting I'm not on the Inca Trail. I'm not getting anywhere near that. Not because even that they would misprepare it, but you just never know. For me, that's just a no-go. I'm just not going to do that. I'm adventurous, but not that adventurous. So,
yeah, choose your foods wisely.
Well, yeah.
When you're in the middle of the mountains. You don't have to name names or anything like that, but do you have some resources you could share that you came across when you were doing your research that could save some people time? Perhaps you want to share just a handful of different company names that you seem like through your research seem like they got good reviews. Again, you don't have to speak to any of them specifically, whatever you're comfortable sharing here.
Well, I would, here was another thing too. Like there were, quote, luxury tours. And frankly, I think the main difference in the luxury tours, they might have given you like a sleeping arrangement where you were lifted off the ground, maybe in a cot of some kind on a mattress.
Oh, not much difference. Basically.
Not much difference. And the other thing was they had open bar with alcohol, which, listen, I love an ice cold beer as much as the next person, but all I drank on the whole Inca Trail, pretty much, I wasn't even really drinking fruit juice. I was just drinking even lukewarm water that they had boiled and staying away from a lot of other stuff. I would say this, that I wouldn't read like on TripAdvisor, whatever company it is. And, it's not hard to find. I mean, there's a half a dozen companies that that are recommended that most people out there are probably going to run across. And what I would say is don't read the 5-star reviews. Find their 3-star and 4-star reviews. And that's going to give you a better idea of kind of not only the really, really good, because logistically they do an amazing job to serve you food, to get you there, to get you into Machu Picchu, to get you back, to keep this thing on the rails. But they have their own agenda. And sometimes they ask you to do things. And there were times, not only myself, but other people said, hey, I don't want to do that. For instance, they were saying, put your at the end of the trip, you have a duffel bag that you give to the porters. Well, at the end of this, put all your stuff in a plastic bag, give us the duffel bag before we leave, and before you go back to Cusco, which meant you're going to get on a train with a plastic bag of your dirty laundry and various other stuff, especially if you're female, that's probably fairly complex. And one of the women on my group just said, look, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring the duffel bag back to the office, which they said you could do anyway in the literature. And so that's a very kind of minimalist example of some of the things that they kind of ran by you that you really had to push back a little and just say, hey, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do something else. Not in an aggressive way, but just in a way that was kind of like, hey, maybe not, And they weren't. As soon as they heard any kind of pushback, they were like, well, fine. That was the end of the conversation, because they have, again, their own agenda, but they also realize that, hey, you're the customer. So if you feel that strongly about it to say you don't want to do it, then, fine.
Yeah.
Have at
okay.
it.
So the 3 or 4-star reviews is a good tip. That also works when you're vetting business ideas, by the way. You have to sell like a product that, yeah, it's a similar thing too. Like a product, you can look at your competitors and read the 3 or 4-star reviews and kind of understand what those lacking features are, and then you can add them to your own. Random hack. Circling back, you would say the overall experience, you're glad you did it. I mean, in the end,
absolutely thrilled. And based on, again, my age, and I would say this too, I was probably the least experienced. Again, the 73-year-old woman that everybody was looking at sideways when she started, it turned out that she had done the complete, Santiago de Compostela Trail, which is in Europe, which is also real arduous. It's also 200 miles long. It goes throughout France and Spain. So, this lady, once she got rolling, I mean, she was the Energizer Bunny, and she was somebody who, certainly belonged there. And the reason I bring that up is most of the other people were experienced trekkers. So again, an incredible experience, an incredible sense of accomplishment. But I don't think, again, part of my research didn't really bring home how hard this is and how physically demanding this is going to be. Certainly on certain days, and certainly in certain parts of the trail that are really just quite difficult.
Obviously, when you go into these physically demanding types of trips, the more you train a bit on the front end, the more you're going to enjoy it.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I haven't even mentioned yet at all, the other thing that makes this quite difficult is the altitude. which Cusco itself is 12,000 feet elevation. And people have this experience. The first day they get there, they're like, it's impossible. I'll never do the Inca Trail. I can't do it. And by the third day, you get acclimated. You do the coca tea, you hydrate, and you just get used to it. And you even get a little bit more exercise with each day. And finally, by the third day, the fourth day, you're good to go. But anybody, again, like there are people I've heard about or read about that fly into Cusco, and the next day they're going to try the Inca Trail. That's just, to me, that's kind of a recipe for disaster.
The altitude sickness thing is unpredictable, and it's not dependent on your fitness level. You could have the most out of shape person that doesn't get it, and then the one that runs marathons gets altitude sickness. Like, the best thing you can do, like you said, is just take time to acclimate. That's all you can do. And if you're not experienced with trekking and this sort of thing, but it's just still something you want to do, this conversation, to me, it's not meant to discourage. It's meant to encourage. It's meant to kind of, give you the best sort of practices. And I mean, the big takeaways for me are just, plan enough time, do it right, make sure you're acclimated, give yourself the best chance of succeeding, prepare yourself beforehand, stand up for yourself. It sounds like when you're on the trip, there's certain things you might want, and book in advance, go during the dry season. I mean, these are all like great points that you brought up for people just diving in, be like, okay, I kind of have my head around this and what it is now. Let me go and lock this in and make it happen, which is exciting. That's the exciting part.
Yes. And I'm going to say there's plenty of stuff on YouTube. There's all kinds of videos. There's all kinds of photos. But one thing that I was I got it once I was off the trail, there's not like an exhaustive photograph of every 50 feet on the Inca Trail, because frankly, a lot of people are not focused on taking pictures. Yes, they stop, they do take some pictures, but it's enough of a grind and it's arduous enough that you really, half the time, you're huffing and puffing and you're like, let me just get through this next set of steps. Let me get through this next uphill part of this thing, and then I'll take a break. Which, by the way, I was trying to keep up with my group, all younger people, all experienced trekkers. And even on the first day, I realized, I have to go at my own pace. I'll kill myself if I try to keep up with these people, if only to stay with the group and not disappoint my guide or feel, I'm falling behind or whatever. But you do, if you are tired, you need to stop and rest, because that's how you will either hurt yourself or fall or whatever. That's another aspect of this. You really just have to be conscious of. You'll get through it. Again, it's not a race. It's you're trying to have a positive experience, and that's part of that positive experience.
I would second, third, and fourth the poles recommendation, even though I did this when I was younger. I mean, poles for treks like this, it doesn't matter your age. It's such a valuable tool, especially when you're coming down.
Yep. Absolutely.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show. Okay, you've got a podcast, man. You're a podcaster. That's exciting.
Yes.
It's called a History Biography Podcast. Some very famous people you've never really heard of. Tell us about like your one or two episodes that are some very famous people we've never really heard of that fascinate you.
There's two types. There's the type you've really never even heard of, and there's some amazing podcasts, and I'll give you an example in a second. But the person, the photograph I use on kind of my podcast art is Edgar Allan Poe. And I know when I mention this to people and they say, wait a minute, I know who Edgar Allan Poe is. What do you mean? I've heard of him, and I will say, okay, tell me everything you know about him. And most people, unless, they're a college literary professor, they run out of stuff after about 30 seconds. But Edgar Allan Poe, and again, what I also do is I take that 700-page biography that most people will take out of the library with every good intention frequently of reading about him. I take that 700-page biography and I kind of reduce it to like 40-minute episodes. So, for instance, Edgar Allan Poe, his wife was 14 years old when he married her. He's the only American literary figure who got kicked out of West Point, which he probably at that point he wanted to be kicked out of West Point. He was an orphan at a very young age. His stepfather disowned him because Edgar Allan Poe was kicked out of Virginia for essentially gambling debts because his stepfather was too cheap to pay his tuition and stuff. And so he figured I'll try to gamble at cards and win the money. Well, he lost even more money. His first effort at trying to publish poetry is now there were only something like 30 manuscripts printed by a company that just printed circulars. Well, if you can get a copy of that, there's only something like 4 copies of that manuscript still in existence. I think one is in the British Museum. There's a couple floating around the U.S., but they're probably the most expensive rare book, certainly in North America, maybe in the world. And it's his first collection of poems that barely, people would find them in an attic. I mean, it had absolutely no impact on his career or whatever. But yet over time, as he became more famous and infamous, this particular rare book is almost a priceless artifact. And kind of last but not least, most people may not realize Edgar Allan Poe, no one even really understands how, and they know he died in a hospital, but the circumstances leading up to his death, he left on a steamship from Central Virginia, and he wound up being found in a hospital near death in Baltimore, Maryland. And how he got to that point is essentially one of the great mysteries of American history and literature, because what happened to him in this particular time period is unknown. Now, one of his problems was he was a terrible alcoholic, and he was sober when he left Richmond, Virginia. By the time he got to Baltimore, he had basically fallen off the wagon, which contributed to his demise. And even subsequent to that, and his gravesite in Baltimore, Maryland, and that took 50 years before there was even a monument to him. I mean, and again, when he died under, he was always perpetually broke. He died very young, and basically when he did die, even his literary legacy was kind of damaged. And it took a century for him to really become, the acclaimed man of letters that he is today in, American literature. So that's a good example. And there's, like Friedrich Nietzsche is another person like that. I mean, Alexander Hamilton, which I kind of did that around, I've been doing this for a while. That wasn't when the musical came out, but it was subsequent to that when there was a lot of interest in Hamilton. And, Alexander Hamilton is, as much as, again, people think they know about him, he's one of those people that he's just a fascinating life and a lot of stuff that people just aren't aware of. And so that's one aspect of this podcast. The other one is, like, for instance, a person by the name of George Elser, who not the Tom Cruise Valkyrie story where a bunch of generals tried to blow up Adolf Hitler, but in 1939, this guy, George Elser, with an absolutely ingenious plan that took him a year to execute, came within 13 minutes of not only blowing up Hitler, but his entire entourage, even before Hitler had invaded France. World War II had just started. And this guy, and it's an amazing story as to how close this guy came and even how ingenious this plan was. And in a lot of ways, how simple it was. And in a nutshell, he realized and figured out that Hitler always went to the same place on the same day to give a speech to commemorate a certain event. And he realized if he was ever going to, and this guy was very consumed with the idea that Hitler was going to destroy Germany, he said, if there was any way for me to get rid of this guy, it was going to be at this particular location at this particular time. And again, he came within, for circumstances, he should have been successful. But like many things involving Hitler and fate, he failed by 13 minutes. Well, even in Germany, this guy's story wasn't well known until probably the late 20th century. And in America, nobody's ever heard of this guy, really, George Elser. So that's another one of the podcasts. And it kind of varies. Some of the people, again, never heard of him. Like the one I just released is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which the movie is the movie, and there's a lot of things in it that are true, but there's a lot of things that are, as most Hollywood films, that are completely fabricated. So that's another good example of, it's kind of what, it's someone everyone's kind of heard of, but they don't really know the specifics of their lives. and what they've heard, what's true and what's not true. So there's by now I've probably got 147 episodes, and most of them are 2 parts. So I've probably got like 70, 75 people that I've talked about.
Wow. But history must be a big passion for you, because this is a lot of work that you're describing. What does studying history or studying historical figures like this do for you personally?
Well, yes, and some people say, history biography. That's another thing I try to do. I try to make this accessible to everybody, because a lot of people just hear history it sounds so dry. But if you go down the list of the people that I've done a podcast on, you got to find at least 2 or 3 or 4 of them, no matter what your background is. I mean, I even did one on Johnny Carson, which was fascinating, to me. And I think to most people, especially, Americans who know who were alive when Johnny Carson was probably one of the biggest stars in America.
Late night talk show host.
Yeah. And was groundbreaking, and nothing like, he kind of set the mold for that whole genre, which today I don't think there's really nothing like him on television now. And I don't think there ever will be again. But even that's what I mean. It's not all these 19th century obscure literary figures and to me, history, to sort of follow up on your question, I like, to me, history it's story. Not all of it. A lot of it is not necessarily accurate, but most of these people led incredibly fascinating lives to me, and interesting, and had amazing effects on world events, or even in their own way. What they did was truly remarkable in a way that really resonates with me. And again, I try to make it so it's not a 700-page book, that it's so, the print is practically making your eyes hurt. I'm trying to make it into a story, not into an academic exercise.
Got it. Well, I mean, congratulations on putting out that many episodes, because I know how much work podcasts are. And yeah, the website, someveryfamouspeople.com, we can link up to it. Is that the best place to kind of check out your stuff and stay in touch? And
there's also there's a link on there to Apple iTunes. So, as you know, and I'm on, as you probably are too, I'm just about every podcast, even some of them that are relatively obscure. And I'm not even sure how I got on some of them, but I'm on Amazon, I'm on Spotify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you
were also on the old game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you won $500,000. I mean, that's insane. I don't every day talk to somebody who won $500,000 on a game show, which is crazy. I have to ask you about that. What did that windfall, let's call it, in a way, do for you? How did it change your life, if at all?
Well, it's an excellent
It's like a dream for everybody. Like,
yeah, it is.
Win a bunch of money on a game show.
Here's the thing: I was in sort of a very interesting place mentally. Let's put it that way. I was in those days. I was working in corporate America, and I wasn't particularly happy. And I had been in a job previous to that where I also was very unhappy. And in this particular job, I had been working for this firm for 5 years. Initially, it was okay, but it was deteriorating. And I really got into a mindset where I said, the only way for me to extricate myself and not wind up homeless. And I love trivia, obviously. If I like history, I probably pretty much like trivia. And I said, the only way I can get out of this hole that I'm in, and I don't even mean mental, or I said, literally, I'm going to wind up probably out on the street one of these days with this. It wasn't getting along with management too well. And so I said, I got to go on the show and I got to win $1 million. I have to do that. There's no other way out. And that's how I got consumed by it. It took me 6 months even to get on the show. And by the way, on my website, I did. It's a novel. It incorporates this experience. And by the way, you can read it. I don't want to push the book. Like you can read the book, and you can find it on my website, and it's on Kindle for nothing. Okay. So if you have Kindle, you can literally read it for nothing.
What's the book?
And the book is called, Is That Your Final Answer? And which, by the way, is the catchword, like Regis Philbin would always say to the contestant, is that your final answer? But it really, what it was kind of Sex in the City from a male perspective in LA, incorporating, this whole experience, and also what happened in, my corporate life and all that kind of stuff. But to get, to really talk to you about the show itself and what happened, basically, I had already left the company I didn't care for, and I was at an internet company. And by the way, because this was in 2000, right at the height of the internet craze, it was also the height of this television show craze. And like the show that I was on was the highest rated television show in America that week. By the way, if you want to watch it, it's on my website, but it's also on YouTube. If you just put in Phil Gibbons Millionaire, you can watch my appearance, which quite frankly is pretty notable for a lot of different reasons. I don't want to give you any spoiler alerts, I do want to give you a spoiler alert. I won't say a whole lot about the appearance because you can watch it, and it's incredibly entertaining. And obviously for me it was memorable, but it was an incredible experience. What happened? Well, I stayed with my internet company. I knew that was going to crash and burn, and I quit that job, and I went to Europe for 6 months. Which, by the way, by the time I got to Europe, I was in Europe for 9/11. I was in Germany literally on the day of 9/11, which is another conversation. But that 6-month trip to Europe was, again, another travel experience. I went to like 15 different European countries. And
wow. Okay.
Just go ahead.
Of course. No, I just love that. I mean, this is perfect for the podcast, right? What does somebody on this podcast do when they win $500,000? Well, of course, they go traveling.
They quit their job.
They quit their job and go traveling. That exactly. That's not surprising. So I love that. That just shows me you were the perfect guest to come on and talk about this today. That's you walk the walk, Philip.
I did. And when I did come back, I never went back to corporate America. I taught in the LA Unified School District for 12 years. That's another whole show.
Yeah, because after the taxes, it's not really enough. It's not like you could retire, right? Because they probably take about 50% or something.
Listen, I'll tell you exactly. And I never minded the feds because I mean that's kind of the price of admission for the greatest show on earth. But I do live in California. I did then. There's no way around it. They make you, before you even get on the show, you have to submit proof of resident. You have to submit identification so they know where you live. And by the way, the show doesn't take out a dime of taxes, but they do make you sign a form that acknowledges that you are responsible for the income tax, that there is income tax, and Disney Corporation and the production company is informing you that you should seek, tax advice, et cetera, et cetera. And in California, by the time they were done with me, and by the way, I had worked that whole year, so I had withholding taken out, and on top of that, they took $220,000. So after California and the feds, I had $280,000.
Yeah, I mean. Still pretty sweet.
Yeah. Well, found money, so sort of found money. And
any advice for anybody out there to how to get on a game show? I know this was a long time ago, but how do you get on a game show?
Well, that was unique in that you called an 800 number, and you had to answer questions.
They don't do that anymore.
No, and then the other, see, now they revert to the old way, which the old way is they interview you. And I interviewed for some of those shows. I never got picked on some of them I thought were so simple. I'm going to make a fortune on this show. Well, you have to get on them. And I don't know what, in that case, because see, with the old Millionaire show, if you remember, you had to also get into the hot seat with the fastest finger whole thing, which was you could get onto the show and never get into the hot seat. They had 10 initial contestants. Well, I was lucky enough to get into the hot seat, where now they interview people. And again, it's this whole interview process. And that's a whole variable that I never did that. So I can't tell you how to beat that rap. I really can't, because I didn't do it that way.
Yeah, there's some interesting game shows out there now. I'm using air quotes. There was one on TV the other day that, I mean, I'm sure they don't have this in America. It's like a dating show, and a bunch of people stand around in these sort of tubes. Like imagine the teleportation tubes from Star Trek or something like that. Like they're in like a clear tube, but it's covered, and then the tube slowly comes up from the feet, and they're completely naked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the contestant is just looking at, all of the goods from like the waist down. Like you see everything here on Norwegian TV. They don't, there's no blurring it out or anything. I can't remember what it's called.
This can't be like North Korea. I mean, what country?
I think it started in England, but now they have like a Swedish version and a Norwegian version, and who knows what else. It's called like Naked something. I can't remember. And then, they're choosing their sort of who they want to eliminate based on what they're seeing there, the bodies, and And then eventually they get to see their face, and then they're all just standing there completely naked, the final contestants, and then I think they pick one or something. But yeah, I don't think you can win $500,000. So I don't know why you want to go into the tube and show all the goods, but I guess different strokes for different folks.
Yes, pardon the expression, but on that show too, I'm sure they do some pre-screening so that nobody's too disappointed on when they do the complete reveal on the tube.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. I can't speak to it, but nor will I ever be able to speak to it. I would say. Philip, thanks, man. Thanks for coming on and giving us the 101 here at Machu Picchu. I think it was super helpful and then fun to dive into the other stuff. And yeah, we'll link up to everything in the show notes. And I appreciate you getting up here or being up in the middle of the night to record this over in California. So yeah, thanks so much, man.
I totally appreciate it. And thanks so much for giving me the opportunity. And hopefully the sound quality is worthwhile.
There you have it. I want to thank Philip for stopping by the show. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Hope it was helpful. I wanted to mention the theme I discussed before we dove into this conversation. The thing that you should never take for granted. The thing that you should let guide and motivate you in your travel and life choices, some of them at least. Your physical ability. We should never take our physical ability for granted. And this is something I always recommend, especially to younger travelers. If you have some big travel goals and some of them are more physical in nature, there might be some other things you really want to do. Like you want to go see the Roman Colosseum or you want to do this, that, or the other. But those are things that you can do at other ages. I would definitely encourage people to prioritize some of the adventures that are more physical in nature early on. It doesn't mean you can't do them later, but as you heard in this interview, and one of the reasons why Philip wanted to come on is he just wanted to be transparent about his experience on the Inca Trail. And, fortunately for me, I did it back in, I think it was 2001 or something like that. And yeah, it's just a wonderful experience. And, for me, it would be a lot tougher right now, I'm sure. My wife, by the way, has a recommendation. She did the Lares Trek, Lares. So if you're interested in a lesser known alternative to the Inca Trail, that still gives you some incredible views, still takes you to Machu Picchu and everything like that, you can look into that. But the point here, as we move out of this episode, is just that reminder. Let's not take our physical ability for granted. I think about this too, just in my daily life, when I'm playing music with the band that I'm in here and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know. You never know. Life is crazy. Like I have the use of my hands. I can play guitar now. I can do these things. You see a lot of people after a period of time, eventually there's some things they can't do anymore. Tony Hawk can't do the crazy half pipe tricks he could do when he was in his 20s and 30s and even 40s. Eventually some of these abilities, they just go by the wayside. So all of that is to say, let's just have gratitude for the physical abilities that we have now, and perhaps thinking about that, considering that as we carve out our travel goals, our life goals, and so on. And with that, I will leave you with a quote from Jim Rohn. And this was what I alluded to earlier in the show, the home we all share. The quote is, "Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live." And I thought that was a great way to wrap this one up. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.